Star Wars has been on hiatus on the big screen for years. 7 years by the time the next movie will come out. But what does this gap mean for the next few Star Wars movies? We have some details from the top. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
Star Wars has been in this weird place where they're doing a lot. Like, we've got the animated shows, we've got the live-action TV shows, we've got the video games, we've got the books, the comics, all of this stuff. But they've really been lacking when it comes to the movie screen. We haven't had anything since the Rise of Skywalker in 2019, and that was 5 years ago.
Wow.
So there's been this wide gap in Star Wars, and it looks like it's going to continue for a little bit, at least 2 years. I think 2026 is the time frame that the next Star Wars movie is going to be out. But we do have some context around the decisions that they're making from Kathleen Kennedy around the efforts that they've been making in Star Wars. And it's been a little bit more, I wouldn't say it's been fully planned out, because I'm pretty sure they all expected a Star Wars movie to have released already. But I do think that they have been a little bit more strategic than a lot of people might think around Star Wars at this time.
Yeah, it does feel a little haphazard, especially with the movie lack.
Yeah, there's not been a Star Wars movie for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And just with all the announcements that we have had and cancellations that we've also had, and just the news flip-flopping back and forth about what's going on, it does seem like there isn't much system to the madness.
Yes.
But I don't know. I'm curious to hear if there's more, if there's some sort of semblance of an idea of what's coming and what's the plan.
Well, Kathleen Kennedy said when things got moved over to Disney, George Lucas had already been talking to many of the people that were involved in the original movies, like Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher. He was in discussions about bringing them back to do a continuation of the saga. Then, Disney bought Star Wars, and then they kind of just took a lot of the things that George Lucas had, because apparently he had up to to episode 16 or something like that planned out. Whoa. And wanted to continue the saga. It more than likely was just bullet points.
Yeah.
But I think he had a firm grasp on what 7, 8, and 9 would have been if he was going to do that. And he said in interviews that actually didn't end up. They didn't take much or anything from the stuff that he had given them to actual fruition. So they kind of took it. They're like, oh, hey, thanks, George. Appreciate this, but we're not going to use any of it. We're going to just kind of clean the slate and see where that goes. But their main priority was finishing out the saga that George Lucas had started. And that was Rise of Skywalker was the conclusion to that saga.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, what do we do now? We saw great success with something like Rogue One, less so with Solo, but I feel like a lot of the problems with Solo was around the marketing and how quickly it came after or before The Last Jedi. Just like a little side tangent, I feel like Star Wars would have been less toxic if we didn't have as much of it.
Ooh, that, yeah.
I think it might be a controversial take, but
maybe, yeah.
Star Wars has always been a bit spicy. When the original trilogy came out, everyone loved it, but people criticized the last movie, Return of the Jedi. They're like, do we really need the Ewoks? Come on, that's so childish, kind of thing. And then eventually they came to love it. Then the prequels came out, and they're like, oh, this is so childish, it sucks, and blah, blah, blah. And then the sequels came out, and now everyone's like, man, the prequels are actually pretty good. These new movies, those are the childish ones.
It's true. Star Wars tends to have this weird streak of whatever's new, other than like Mandalorian or something. It seems to get a bad rap for the first bit. And then
and eventually it's
going to
come back. We just wait 15 years until the sequel trilogy are like, actually, the sequel trilogy movies are pretty good.
Yeah, we'll see. But
but I don't know how. accurate that will be, but I think there's going to be a portion of the fans that found Star Wars through the sequel movies, and those are the movies that they have the most connection to and they enjoy the most. So, but when it comes to the next version of Star Wars, they've been experimenting a lot. And Kathleen Kennedy said in an interview a few things that I think were pretty interesting. She said, now that we've done that, we're stepping back. Stories have been told within this universe over the last 40-odd years, and there's now the realization that this is a mythology that actually spans about 25,000 years. When you really start to look at all the different stories that have been told, whether it's in the books and games, we just need the time to step back and really absorb what George had created and then start to think about where things might go. And then she continues on and says, that's what we've been doing, and we've been having a great deal of fun doing it and meeting with lots of different filmmakers and talent. There's so many fans out there and so many filmmakers that have been influenced by Star Wars for so long that it's a fantastic opportunity to get a sense of who wants to be a part of this. So that's what we've been doing. And I think the real key thing here, she says it in the earlier part of this interview, and it talks about the variety of Star Wars fans, that Star Wars is so many different things to so many different fans. There are fans that, and I've met them, I've talked to them, that only like The Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. They only care about The Mandalorian. And they only care about The Mandalorian, not the Book of Boba Fett. They literally just care about The Mandalorian and Grogu. Mm-hmm. And there are fans that only see the original trilogy as Star Wars, fans that see the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. There are fans that don't see the sequel trilogy as Star Wars, and they only see the sequel trilogy, or they only read the books, or they only read the video or the comics, or they only play the video games. Like, there's so many subsects of the Star Wars fandom that I think is going to be very interesting for them to tackle in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. The fandom is a bit of I don't want to say a mess. We're all a little crazy in here.
We're getting close to 50 years of Star Wars.
It's true. There is, and like you were saying, there is so much Star Wars out there that people can really just pick and choose what they want from Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that does come from, you see it a lot with, especially like the legend stuff. Like you see people who like love the original stuff, and they go into the books because they needed more of it while they were waiting for and then now they have a whole like narrative for how the rest of the thing should go.
But even with Legends, there are people that only read certain parts of Legends, as we've seen with a lot of the discourse around the Acolyte. There's a lot of stuff in the Acolyte that's from Legends specifically. Like if you look at the lightsaber whip, there are versions of the lightsaber whip within Legends, but because of the breadth of Legends, like there are tons of books, probably hundreds of books in Legends. Yeah. So it even like subsects down from that.
It's true. There's so much to pick and choose in Star Wars. This fan base is just so huge, and you can't really fathom like what it is that people really want, because there's too much. There's so much of it that it means so many different things to so many different people, that you can't just throw something at the wall and be like, okay, we're gonna make everyone happy with this. It's like Disney's got to make their own choices. They've got to decide this is where we want to go, and we're just gonna stick to it, and this is what Star Wars is going to be.
And I think that really comes down to the struggle that Star Wars is going to face as they get into the movies more and more. We're not going to see the cohesive 3-act structure that we saw in the trilogies kind of thing. Like, I highly doubt that we'll ever see a legitimate, from the start planned trilogy of Star Wars in the foreseeable future, probably maybe even for the next decade. Wow. I think they're going to be much more focused around how can we experiment and see what works. We're going to do this thing with Rey, and we're going to do this thing with the Mandalorian Grogu. We're going to do this thing where we go all the way back to the original, the first Jedi, and we're going to do that and see how that works. We're going to do all of these different things, and that is going to be Star Wars for the foreseeable future. And I wonder how successful that's going to be. We found various levels of success with that in the TV shows. Yeah. Mandalorian was a massive hit, mostly because they didn't plan on it being a massive hit. Yeah. I feel like Lucasfilm and Disney in particular are better when they don't think something's going to do well.
Yep.
Than they are when this is going to be a hit. Because when they think it's going to be a hit, they kind of give up. Like the Solo movie, I feel like they almost felt like it was going to be a surefire success. Like, oh yeah, we can totally do Marvel with Star Wars. We can release The Last Jedi and then 6 months later do Solo a Star Wars story, and we don't have to do any good marketing for it. It's like no. Clearly that they took the wrong lessons from that. It's like, okay, no more one-off Star Wars projects around like a single character.
No.
Which is a shame. But
yeah.
Kathleen Kennedy was asked around like the blurring of lines of TV and movies in this interview, and she says, yes, that's definitely something that they've found success with, of experimenting and doing various things with like the TV shows, and then that ultimately going to influence the direction that they take the movies.
I'm going to be interested in how well that does work, because I think they've only just started skimming the surface for that.
Yeah.
Especially with Mandalorian and Grogu, I think we'll see the biggest, like...
That will be the biggest case
test
of like if it's going to be successful. Can they take someone that's in the TV show and make them a big character?
I mean, it feels like The Mandalorian's going to be just fine.
I think that movie's going to be a huge success, but I think it's going to teach Lucas from the wrong lessons, and that's what scares me the most about that. It's like, oh, we can put barely any effort into this project and just put Mandalorian Grogu into it, and it's going to be successful.
Like, no,
because all of the rumors say that the Mandalorian Grogu movie was greenlit at Star Wars Celebration in London. That this was a discussion that was had at Star Wars Celebration, and it was kind of like, we could probably do this.
We could probably make a movie out of that.
And it's true, because they already have the teams built up. They know how to make the shows. The shows are a bit more complicated in terms of like a timeline perspective, because they have so much more time to tell stories. So, but that scares me, because if they're like, oh, hey, we're making the Mandalorian Grogu movie because it's the easiest to make and get out. Like if that's going to be the first Star Wars movie, that's going to be a shaky foundation to start Star Wars off and the movies again.
Oh man, I mean, and so much of this is just we don't know the behind the scenes truly of what's going on, of how much effort they're really putting into this stuff. It sounds like Disney wants to really give movies a go again.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the only way. They've lost money on Star Wars. They haven't made back the money that they spent on Star Wars, apparently, which I wonder if that's actually accurate, or if it's just like accountants being like, yeah, we totally lost money on the Star Wars thing, because if you calculate the books, the toys and all that stuff, they've definitely made a profit. But
surely
from the movies in particular and the TV shows, they spend a lot, like $180 million. That's a movie budget on The Acolyte, and that's on Disney Plus. And you can't categorize necessarily, like someone might subscribe to Disney Plus specifically to watch The Acolyte, but they're also going to go and watch Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
They're also going to watch the Iron Man movies. They're going to go and watch the Avengers movies. They're going to go watch Bluey or whatever. Like, by the time that you're actually like splitting it out, I don't think any of the Disney stuff is actually successful monetarily for them to make their money back. Yeah. The real thing that I wonder about with this struggle with doing a bunch of these different things is they've lost the plot on what Star Wars is and should be. It's not a realm like a toy box, which inspired The Mandalorian. Star Wars was successful because it told a story everyone could get around. It's someone who was from small beginnings that was able to have a large impact on the universe and go and grow through their struggles and become a better person through their own efforts and their community to make the galaxy a better place, to defeat evil. That is the core of what Star Wars is. There's a lot like deeper stuff, like Star Wars has always been political in terms of like a statement against like the Vietnam War and colonialism. Like that's the layer deeper. But when you really boil down the story, it's the hero's journey. And I feel like we haven't had a hero's journey in any of the new Star Wars stuff. I mean, you can kind of see it with Rey, but she doesn't have the full life cycle like she doesn't follow the full structure of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell and what was the foundation of Star Wars really. Because of how they made those movies. They didn't plan out all 3 movies. They just, J.J. Abrams, make a movie. Okay, sweet, done. Ryan Johnson, make a movie. Do whatever you want to, buddy. Oh, okay, sweet, I'll do this. And then J.J. Abrams.
Get back in here.
We're going to kick Colin Trevorrow out and you're back in. So, like, I feel like they need to boil down what Star Wars is first. Mm-hmm. Instead, they need to boil down what Star Wars was. Mm-hmm. And look at what made these things successful, the story beats that were resonant with people throughout decades and generations. So if you show someone the original trilogy now that had never seen it, there are things that they can connect with that people in 1977, when the movie first came out, can connect with. Like, these good stories connect no matter who the person is.
Yep.
And I feel like Star Wars in the recent era has been struggling with that deeper connection of the story piece.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think they need to really nail down what it is that Star Wars is in this point in time, and then what it needs to become. Mm-hmm. They need to at least have that plan.
Yes.
They need to at least know where they were, where they are now, and where they're going.
Yeah.
Because if not, we're just gonna keep getting
accidental success.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like Andor was something that I highly doubt any of them expected to be as good as it was. Mm-hmm. And the main reason was the team that was focused on The Mandalorian wasn't involved with Andor. Mm-hmm. Because those are 2 different kinds of Star Wars. Andor is a good story first that just so happens to take place in Star Wars. And The Mandalorian would not exist without Star Wars.
Yep.
There's nothing in The Mandalorian, except there's parts of the first season. Like, you can always connect with like a father-son story, adopted kind of story. Like, that's something that is very resonant. But once you get past season 1, seasons 2 and 3 become Star Wars and are reliant on Star Wars over the story.
Yeah.
Specifically season 3.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're in this weird state with Star Wars where they've got incredible creators and creatives and directors and people that want to do things in Star Wars that are kind of scared to get involved with Star Wars. And then there's the ones that are getting stuff done but are limited by the efforts or the focuses that Disney and Lucasfilm have on the projects that are coming out.
It's a tough time. It's a tough time to be in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. But I think they'll get there. Like, I think obviously with all their experimentation right now, they're going to get somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, you throw enough stuff at the wall, something's going to stick. I just hope that they make they learn the right things with it. Because Obi-Wan was a huge show. In terms of a numbers perspective, but in terms of a story, it was garbage.
Yeah,
like it doesn't have good character growth. It doesn't have good character development. The big thing that was driving that show was the promotion of Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader again,
and just Ewan McGregor.
And that whole fight doesn't make sense in the story because there isn't a satisfying end that you can have from that because they don't work into the story ways to make that payoff successful. Ahsoka was one of the most popular ones as well. Very messy because they're trying to put too much on top of it to build out this bigger thing when they need the movies to build out the bigger things and they need the smaller shows to fill in the cracks.
Yep.
And be a little bit more experimental.
Yeah. Star Wars has been around for how long, and yet we're still having growing pains.
Yes. So, but I think that's just industry-wide. The film industry right now is in upheaval because of the change in how people take in movies. And there is this want for bigger projects, things that will drive people to the movie theater. But also, if you look at Dune's a good example of this. Something that was called unadaptable, which is the Dune books. Told very well, restructured to tell some very nuanced storytelling pieces, actually worked and was successful and was one of the biggest movies.
Yep.
So there's a lot of these different layers, and I think people are wanting the stories, but they also want the spectacle to bring them into the theater. So there's this weird mix match of like, when you make a big movie, it's hard to tell a good story because there's so much more weight. You need to kind of make sure that your bet is going to pay off. So you're going to do something a little bit more safe, when the less safe things typically have the bigger payoffs. So it's a weird conundrum there.
Yep. Star Wars needs to take some risks. That's what we're saying.
Yes. And they're started, like with the TV shows, I think they're doing some good things with like testing things out. Acolyte is a good test. I think there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that may have worked against the Acolyte's favor. More than likely, they probably just didn't have enough time to review the scripts in various ways that they probably should have before they had to get kicked off on filming. So there's a lot of these types of things that are happening.
Yeah.
But let us know your thoughts. What do you want for Star Wars movies? Is there something that you're excited about? Do you think we should have less outside of the Star Wars movies, but like focus more on the movies? Let us know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or contact uplinkpodcast.com if you're listening to this wherever you find podcasts. As always, thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you.